You finally hit 5 figures in your savings account. You should feel rich, unstoppable, financially secure. Instead, you're lying awake at night feeling broker than ever. This isn't just in your head, it's a documented psychological trap that's derailing thousands of smart savers, and understanding it might be the difference between building real wealth and staying stuck forever. There's a moment that happens to almost every first-time saver that nobody warns you about. You check your bank account one morning and see it. $10,000. 5 figures. The milestone you've been grinding toward for months, maybe years. You expect to feel accomplished, secure, maybe even a little proud. Instead, you feel poor. Not just not rich, actually poor. More financially anxious than when you had $300 to your name. The goals that seemed achievable last month now feel impossibly distant. The sacrifices that felt temporary now feel suffocating. And worst of all, that number you worked so hard to reach suddenly looks laughably small when you start thinking about real financial goals, like retirement, homeownership, or genuine financial independence. This is what I call the $10,000 trap, and it's one of the most dangerous moments in your entire financial journey. It's dangerous because it happens right when you're building momentum, right when good habits are forming, right when compound interest is about to start working in your favor. And it makes people do irrational things. Blow their savings on something they don't need just to get something for their sacrifice, stop saving altogether because it doesn't matter anyway, or fall into a depression spiral about money that kills their earning potential. The psychology behind this trap is fascinatingly complex, involving cognitive biases, evolutionary psychology, and social comparison mechanisms that your brain evolved over millions of years. But more importantly, understanding exactly why this happens gives you the framework to push through it, because the people who break through this barrier are the ones who actually build wealth. The ones who quit here stay stuck forever. Let's talk about what's really happening in your brain when you hit this milestone, and more importantly, what you need to do about it. So let's start with the first and most counterintuitive part of this trap. The more financially aware you become, the poorer you feel. And that awareness hits hardest right around the $10,000 mark. Think about your financial life before you started saving seriously. Maybe you were living paycheck to paycheck, or close to it. You probably weren't thinking much about retirement accounts, investment returns, or compound interest. Your financial world was simple. Make money, spend money, try not to overdraft. There's a certain blissful ignorance in that simplicity. But to save your first $10,000, you had to change. You had to start paying attention. You downloaded a budgeting app. You learned about high-yield savings accounts. You read articles about financial independence. You joined communities of people talking about money. You became financially literate. Here's what nobody tells you about financial literacy. It shows you how much you don't know. And more painfully, it shows you how far behind you actually are. When you didn't know anything about retirement, you weren't worried about retirement. Now you know that financial advisors recommend having 1 times your annual salary saved by age 30. If you're 30 and making $50,000 a year, that $10,000 in your savings account isn't impressive. You're $40,000 behind where you should be. Before you understood real estate, you weren't stressed about homeownership. Now you know that a modest house in your area costs $400,000, and you need at least 20% down to avoid PMI. That's $80,000. Your $10,000 is 12.5% of the way there. It'll take you 6 more years at your current savings rate, and prices are rising faster than you can save. Before you learned about investing, you weren't anxious about compound interest and time in the market. Now you know that every year you delay investing costs you potentially decades of compound growth. That $10,000 sitting in savings at 1% interest could be in index funds averaging 7%, but you're afraid to invest because you don't know enough yet, so you're losing 6% potential growth every year you wait. This is the awareness curse. Education created the anxiety. Knowledge revealed the gap. The more you learn about personal finance, the more inadequate your current position feels. And $10,000 is exactly the point where you know enough to be dangerous. You understand the goals, but don't yet have the resources to reach them. The psychological term for this is the Dunning-Kruger Valley. When you know nothing, you have unwarranted confidence. When you know a little, you have maximum anxiety because you can see all the things you don't know and haven't done. It's only when you know a lot that confidence returns. And most people are sitting in that valley of anxiety, at the $10,000 mark. Now let's talk about what it actually took to save that $10,000, because this is where the emotional weight really builds. You didn't save $10,000 by accident. You saved it through systematic deprivation. Every $1,000 in that account represents dozens of small no's. No to drinks with coworkers. No to the vacation your friends took. No to upgrading your phone. No to the concert you wanted to see. No to the restaurant everyone was excited about. No to the wardrobe refresh. No to the gym membership. No to the streaming services. No, 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 no. For most people, saving their first $10,000 takes between 1 and 3 years of conscious sacrifice. Let's say it took you 18 months. That's 18 months of being the cheap friend. 18 months of staying home while others went out. 18 months of meal prepping when you could have ordered delivery. 18 months of wearing old clothes, driving an old car, living in a smaller apartment than you could afford. Here's what your brain does with all those sacrifices. It keeps a ledger. Psychologists call this the psychological accounting effect. Your brain is literally tracking all the things you gave up, and it expects compensation. It expects a reward. It expects that sacrifice to have been worth something. And then you hit $10,000 and look around, and your life looks exactly the same. You're still driving the same car, still living in the same apartment, still saying no to the same things. The only difference is a number in an account that you can't even spend without feeling guilty, because then you'd be back below 10,000. This is what I call sacrifice accumulation. The weight of all those micro deprivations builds up, and at the $10,000 mark, it becomes crushing. Your brain is screaming, "We sacrificed for this? This is what we get?" And the rational answer that you're building a foundation for future security doesn't satisfy the emotional part of your brain that's been tracking every missed experience. This is compounded by a phenomenon called hedonic adaptation. You've adapted to your new, more frugal lifestyle. The things you gave up don't feel like active sacrifices anymore, they just feel like your life. But your brain hasn't forgotten what you're missing. It's just gotten used to missing it, which somehow feels worse. And here's the cruelest part. You can't even really enjoy that $10,000. You can't spend it on something nice for yourself, because that would defeat the purpose. It has to sit there, untouchable, doing nothing but existing. You've created a pile of money that makes you feel poor because you're so afraid of being poor that you can't use the money you have. Now we need to talk about what happened to your reference group, because this is absolutely critical to understanding why you feel poorer after saving. When you had no savings, you compared yourself to other people with no savings. Your coworker, who's always broke, you felt equal. Your friend who lives paycheck to paycheck, you felt sympathy, but not inadequacy. Your reference group was people in similar financial situations, and within that group, you were doing fine. You weren't rich, but you weren't a failure. Something shifts when you hit $10,000. Suddenly, you're not comparing yourself to people with no savings anymore. You're comparing yourself to people who have money. And this is a catastrophic shift in your psychology. You start following financial independence accounts on social media. Those people aren't celebrating their first 10,000, they're posting about hitting their first 100,000, their first million. They're retiring at 35. They're buying rental properties. They're living off passive income. And suddenly, your 10,000 looks pathetic. You start engaging with personal finance communities online. The advice isn't for beginners anymore. It's about tax loss harvesting, backdoor Roth conversions, real estate syndications. You're surrounded by people who are 5, 10, 20 steps ahead of you. Your milestone isn't a milestone to them, it's where they started. You read articles about how much you should have saved by your age. The headlines aren't congratulating you for having anything, they're telling you that the median person your age has 30,000 saved, or 50,000, or more. You went from feeling ahead to feeling catastrophically behind overnight. This is what psychologists call relative deprivation. You're not poor in absolute terms, you have $10,000, which is more than 50% of Americans have in savings. But you feel poor in relative terms because you changed your comparison group. You traded up from comparing yourself to people with less to comparing yourself to people with more. And that comparison is absolutely brutal for your psychology. The social media algorithms make this worse. The more you engage with financial content, the more high-achieving financial content you see. The algorithm doesn't show you people who are struggling, it shows you people who are winning. So your feed becomes a constant stream of people who are richer, smarter, and further ahead than you. Your $10,000 isn't celebrated. It's not even mentioned. It's assumed as a starting point that everyone passed years ago. And here's the insidious part. You needed that comparison shift to improve. You needed to follow those accounts to learn. You needed to engage with those communities to get advice. You needed to read those articles to understand what you should be doing. But the cost of that education is the destruction of your previous sense of adequacy. Let's talk about goals, because this is where things get really psychologically complex. Your first financial goal was simple: save $10,000. It was concrete, specific. You could track your progress every single week. You were at $2,000, then $3,000, then $5,000. Every month you got closer. The goal was visible on the horizon, and you were moving toward it. That created motivation. That created momentum. And then you hit it. And then what? The next goals aren't concrete anymore. They're massive and abstract and terrifying. Retirement isn't a number you can easily track. It's a moving target based on your age, your expected retirement age, your expected lifestyle, market returns, inflation, and a dozen other variables. Buying a house isn't just about the down payment, it's about qualifying for a mortgage, finding the right property, timing the market, and committing to 30 years of debt. Financial independence isn't even clearly defined. How much is enough? When are you actually free? This is what I call the goalpost illusion. You went from a clear, achievable goal to multiple vague, enormous goals that might take decades to reach. And psychologically, this is devastating for motivation. Behavioral psychology research shows that humans are motivated by proximate goals, not distant ones. We need to see progress. We need to feel like we're getting closer. When the next milestone is 7 years away, your brain can't maintain motivation. It's too far, too abstract, too uncertain. And worse, the goalposts keep moving. You thought you needed $80,000 for a down payment, but now prices went up and you need $100,000. You thought you needed $1 million to retire, but inflation and market volatility mean you probably need $1.5 million. You're running toward a finish line that's moving away from you faster than you can run toward it. This creates what psychologists call learned helplessness. You feel like your actions don't matter because the goals are so large and so far away that any individual effort feels meaningless. Saving another $1,000 doesn't move the needle. It's 0.83% of the down payment you need. It's 0.066% of your retirement goal. It feels like nothing. Compare that to how it felt when you were saving your first $10,000. Adding $1,000 was 10% progress. Massive, visible, exciting. Now adding $1,000 is a rounding error on your long-term goals. The psychological term for this is the progress paradox. The closer you get to your goals, the further away they feel, because your awareness of how much further you need to go increases faster than your actual progress. Now we need to talk about something that's even more painful: the realization of what you gave up to get here. When you started saving, you understood intellectually that you were trading present consumption for future security. But you didn't really feel it. It was abstract, theoretical. You were making smart choices. At $10,000, something clicks. You start doing the math. You start calculating opportunity costs, and it's brutal. You save $10,000 over 18 months. That's about $550 per month. Think about what that money could have bought you. That's international vacations you didn't take. That's experiences with friends and family that you missed. That's professional development courses you skipped. That's clothing that would have helped you feel confident. That's dates that could have built relationships. That's hobbies you didn't pursue. And now you're sitting here with $10,000 that doesn't actually change your life. You're not financially independent. You're not retired. You're not even close. You traded 18 months of life experiences for a number in an account that's not enough to do anything meaningful with. This is what economists call opportunity cost. But emotionally, it's something more painful: regret. Not regret that you saved. Rational you knows it was the right choice. But emotional you is calculating all the things you missed and wondering if it was worth it. The research on happiness economics shows that experiences typically provide more lasting happiness than money in an account. A trip with friends creates memories that last for decades. $10,000 in savings creates anxiety about whether it's enough. Your brain knows this, even if you don't consciously acknowledge it, and it's showing you the receipts. This gets worse when you start comparing your life to the lives of people who didn't save. Your friend who spent everything isn't stressed about money. They're stressed about not having money, but they're also not carrying the weight of sacrifice. They're not lying awake calculating how far behind they are. They're not feeling the opportunity cost of every choice. They're just living, and sometimes, that looks really appealing compared to your anxious, calculating existence. And here's the thing that makes this particularly painful. You can't get that time back. Those 18 months of experiences you missed are gone. If you spent the $10,000 now on experiences, you'd be broke again, but you still wouldn't have the experiences you missed. You'd have different experiences. The ones you sacrificed are simply gone, and that's a loss that can never be recovered. Now, let's talk about something that most people don't realize is happening at the $10,000 mark. You're sitting on top of enormous latent potential, but you can't see it yet, and that invisible potential makes you feel poor. $10,000 in a savings account earning 1% interest is $10,000. In 10 years, it'll be about $11,000. That's pathetic. That's not wealth building. That's barely keeping up with inflation. It feels like your $10,000 is doing nothing. But $10,000 invested in a diversified index fund, averaging 7% annual returns, is something completely different. In 10 years, that's $19,600. In 20 years, it's $38,600. In 30 years, it's $76,000. That same $10,000, just sitting there, compounds into real wealth. But you can't see that growth happening. You can't feel it. It's theoretical. It's on a calculator. It's not real until it's real, and right now, it's not real. So you're sitting on this massive potential that feels like nothing. This is what I call the plateau of latent potential. You're at the point where you have enough capital that compound interest can actually start to work meaningfully, but you're not at the point where you can see it working yet. You're in the boring middle where nothing feels like it's happening. The math of compound growth is counterintuitive. The first 10,000 is the hardest, the second 10,000 is easier, the third is easier still. By the time you get to 100,000, the growth starts to accelerate dramatically. But you're not there yet. You're still in the phase where it's all discipline and no visible results. This creates a psychological trap where you feel like you're making no progress even though you're actually at the most critical phase. You've built the foundation, but you can't see the house yet. You've planted the seed, but there's no tree. You've lit the fuse, but the explosion is still years away. And because you can't see the potential, you start questioning whether it's worth continuing. Maybe you should just spend it. Maybe you should quit saving. Maybe this whole thing is pointless. You're sitting on a gold mine, but all you see is dirt. Here's something that happens around the $10,000 mark that people rarely talk about. You're stuck between two identities, and neither one fits anymore. You're no longer the broke person you used to be. You can't relate to people who have no savings. When they complain about money stress, you think, well, if you just budgeted, you've crossed a line. You're not one of them anymore. But you're also not the financially successful person you're trying to become. You're not financially independent. You're not rich. You're not even secure. You're definitely not the person posting about their investment portfolio or their rental income or their early retirement. You're not one of them either. You're stuck in this awkward middle space where you don't belong anywhere. You're too financially conscious to fit in with your old peer group, but not financially successful enough to fit in with your aspirational peer group. You're in identity limbo. This creates a profound psychological discomfort. Humans need identity. We need to know who we are and where we fit. When we're between identities, we feel untethered, lost, and that feeling manifests as financial anxiety, even though it's actually an identity crisis. You've changed your behavior, but you haven't reached the level where that behavior pays off visibly. You've sacrificed like a financially successful person, but you don't have the results that make that sacrifice feel validated. You're living in the gap between who you were and who you're trying to become, and that gap is uncomfortable. This is compounded by the fact that your social relationships are built on your old identity. Your friends expect you to be the person who says yes to things. When you keep saying no because you're saving, they start to pull away. Not maliciously, they just adapt to your absence. So you're losing social connection with your old identity group while not yet finding connection with a new one. And here's the brutal truth. This phase can last years. You might be in identity limbo for 3, 5, even 10 years before you reach the point where your financial position matches your financial behavior. That's a long time to feel like you don't belong anywhere. Now let's talk about something that creates enormous stress at this stage: You know what you should be doing, but you're not doing it. And that gap is eating you alive. You know you should invest that $10,000 instead of keeping it in savings. You've read the articles. You understand compound interest. You know that inflation is eating away at your purchasing power. But you haven't done it yet because you're scared. What if the market crashes? What if you pick the wrong investments? What if you need the money in an emergency? You know you should be maximizing your retirement contributions. You understand tax-advantaged accounts, but you're not maxing out your 401k because you feel like you need the cash flow. Or maybe your employer doesn't match. Or maybe you're self-employed and keep putting off opening an IRA. You know you should probably talk to a financial advisor, but you're embarrassed that you only have $10,000. Will they even take you seriously? Plus their fees might eat into your returns, so you keep putting it off. You know you need to create a more detailed financial plan. But the spreadsheets are overwhelming. The variables are too complex. You start building one, get confused, and abandon it. This gap between knowledge and action creates what psychologists call cognitive dissonance. You believe you're a responsible, financially savvy person, but your actions don't match that belief, and that dissonance is psychologically painful. Your brain needs to resolve it somehow. Usually, the brain resolves cognitive dissonance by changing the belief to match the action. If you're not investing, maybe investing isn't actually that important. If you're not maxing retirement accounts, maybe retirement is overrated. If you're not working with an advisor, maybe advisors are a scam. You start rationalizing your inaction, which keeps you stuck. The alternative is to change your actions to match your beliefs, but that requires overcoming fear, overwhelm, and inertia. It's hard, really hard. So most people stay stuck in the gap, knowing what they should do but not doing it, and that knowledge makes them feel worse, not better. So, after all of this analysis, what do you actually do? How do you break through the $10,000 trap instead of staying stuck in it? First, you need to reframe what $10,000 means. It's not the end goal. It's not even a milestone. It's the minimum viable capital to start building real wealth. Think of it like this: you can't plant a garden with one seed. $10,000 is the point where you finally have enough seeds to plant a garden that can actually grow. The psychological shift you need to make is from saving to building. Saving is about accumulation. Building is about deployment. That $10,000 needs to start working for you, not sitting idle making you anxious. This means you need to make a decision in the next 30 days about how to deploy this capital. Not someday, not when you feel ready. In the next 30 days, because every month that money sits in a low-interest savings account is a month you're losing ground to inflation and opportunity cost. If you're risk-averse, put it in a target-date retirement fund. If you're moderately comfortable, start with a 3-fund portfolio of total market index funds. If you're aggressive, allocate to growth stocks and real estate. The specific choice matters less than making a choice and starting the compounding process. Second, you need to create what I call milestone-based goals instead of dollar-based goals. Don't focus on save $50,000 because that's too far away. Focus on establish an automated investment system or max out Roth IRA contributions this year or invest for 12 consecutive months. These are behavioral milestones, not wealth milestones, and they're achievable in the near term. Behavioral milestones create momentum because you can achieve them through your actions, not through market performance or time. You can't control when you hit $50,000. Markets fluctuate, life happens. But you can control whether you automate your investments this month. That creates a sense of progress and agency. Third, you need to solve the comparison problem by curating your inputs. Unfollow the accounts that make you feel inadequate. Stop reading articles about what you should have saved by now. Engage with content that's appropriate for your actual financial stage, not aspirational content for people 10 years ahead of you. Find communities of people who are at your level who are celebrating their first $10,000, their first investment, their first year of consistent saving. These people are your real peer group, not the early retirees and real estate moguls. Comparison is inevitable, but you can control who you're comparing yourself to. Fourth, you need to address the sacrifice accumulation by giving yourself permission to spend strategically. This sounds counterintuitive, but hear me out. Take 5% of that $10,500 and spend it on something that meaningfully improves your quality of life. Not a splurge. Not a waste. something that addresses the deprivation you've been feeling. Maybe it's a weekend trip with friends to reconnect socially. Maybe it's a professional course that increases your earning potential. Maybe it's updating your wardrobe so you feel confident. Whatever it is, spend that money intentionally and guilt-free. This does two things. It releases the psychological pressure of sacrifice accumulation, and it reminds you that money is a tool for living, not just a number to accumulate. Fifth, you need to shift from defense to offense. Up until now, you've been playing defense, cutting spending, avoiding debt, protecting what you have. That's important, but it's not sufficient. At $10,000, you need to start playing offense, increasing your income. This is the biggest leverage point that people miss. Saving $500 a month is hard. Earning an extra $1,000 a month is also hard. But it has twice the impact. Focus your energy on skill development, career advancement, side income, or business building. The difference between making $50,000 a year and $70,000 a year dwarfs the impact of cutting your latte budget. Finally, you need to make peace with the timeline. Real wealth building takes decades, not years. You're not behind. You're on track. The anxiety you feel isn't evidence that you're failing, it's evidence that you're in the hardest part of the journey. The part where discipline matters and results aren't visible yet. Think of it like working out. The first few months are brutal. You're sore, you're tired, you don't see results. But if you quit at month 3, you get nothing. If you push through to month 6, month 12, suddenly you see progress. Financial building is the same. You're at month 3, don't quit now. The $10,000 trap is real, and it's powerful, and it derails a lot of people who are doing everything right. But now you know what it is. You know why you feel poor even though you're not. You know that the anxiety isn't a sign that you're failing, it's a sign that you're transitioning. The people who build real wealth aren't the ones who never feel this way. They're the ones who feel it and push through anyway. They're the ones who make the next decision, and the next one, and the next one, even when it feels pointless. They're the ones who understand that this discomfort is temporary and necessary. You have $10,000. That's not the end. It's barely the beginning. But it's enough. Enough to start compound interest working. Enough to build systems that scale. Enough to prove to yourself that you can do this. The question isn't whether you'll feel poor at this milestone. You will. Everyone does. The question is whether you'll let that feeling stop you, or whether you'll recognize it for what it is. The signal that you're about to break through to the next level. Your move.